So here we have Joe Biden and his chart, and in this video I'm going to talk about an issue that is causing Democrats a whole lot of concern, namely Biden's electability due to his old age, to the fact that, let's face it, Joe, in terms of his expression, in terms of his ability to project himself, his communication patterns, has definitely lost a step. If you compare where he is today to where he was in prior years, for example, during the period when he was vice president to Barack Obama, he does not communicate as clearly, and he gives off a vibe that is lower energy than would be preferable. There's no question about that. However, that said, I still think it's pretty laughable to compare his demeanor, his performance, his anything literally to that of the Orange Menace, since the Orange Menace is 2 or 3 years younger, and if anything, is at much greater risk of a health event based on being considerably more out of shape than Joe is, for one thing. And in terms of cognitive decline, Trump has exhibited considerably more of that at various times through speeches and so forth. And the real evidence of cognitive decline would be if Biden were making poor decisions, or if when he has to decide something important, he doesn't do it well. The fact of the matter is he has outflanked Republicans at every turn, including much younger Republicans, all throughout his presidency. So this is really a perception problem, and you could call it an optics problem, for example. Yes, it's true, of course, that were he younger it would be better, but I do not think he is at death's door or at any risk of doing something bad on account of his age. The question is, what does the astrology say? Can it explain it? And I think it does. And so when we look at his chart, we know that this issue goes back to the year when he entered the presidency, began to hear about it more and more, particularly at that time from right-wing media. That was their talking point. Then by 22, it was picked up by the mainstream media as well, and both the right-wing and the mainstream media are all over it during 2023. And so when we look at the topic and we ask ourselves, well, why is this happening? Old age, factors of time, unquestionably 99+% of the time, it's going to be Saturn. Saturn is the planet that rules exactly that. Now, we first have to say that before I get to the transits of Saturn, which explain this, we can look at Biden's progressions to notice that at the time of his election, Saturn was in a direct station. Of course, Mercury was there as well. Now, this is very significant because Mercury had been in a retrograde period since 1999, and so he actually served as VP during the retrograde period of Mercury. But it was only when it went direct in 2020 that he ascended to the presidency. But Saturn was also direct, and I remember making the case in 2018 that he would become president. Precisely because of this, I saw both of these as very powerful progressions pointing in this direction. So definitely the Saturn there correlated with reaching a high point in his life, not with being pushed back or denied. That is a statement of power about his Saturn. If this Saturn were a problem, then being in a direct station such as this would probably have denied him the presidency, but it did not. So that's the first thing to say. But then if we go to the transits to find more insight, first we would look at going back to 21 and 22, it was in this region here in the summer of 2021 that he ran into his first major pickle. If you recall, it was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which again was a very unfair situation because all of that was essentially caused by Trump's shenanigans, and Biden didn't have much option, but he probably could have done a better job. And everybody wants to do Monday morning quarterbacking, but bottom line, that did not work out well for him. And that's because at the time, we take the Saturn, go back here, at the time, in the early Aquarius degrees, it was opposing Pluto in his chart, and that's a planet in the 9th sign of his chart. Therefore, foreign affairs, it's a foreign country that got him. And Saturn opposing was really quite bad. Then it moves forward from there, and at 12, 13 degrees, it's squaring Mars, which is still not a good situation because the Mars squares the Pluto. It still links it to that difficult planet up in the 9th. And so essentially it continues to work the Pluto-Mars square from Aquarius. So that did not let up on that account. And you could say that by the time we get to 22, which where Mars is being squared, the mention of his age starts to pick up. And then all through 22, it increases even more because it got all the way to 25. Now you're getting in the vicinity of the Sun. Prior to that, 21 degrees in here in the spring, it's squaring Mercury. So the Saturn continues to challenge his Scorpio planets, and this is pretty much the story all through 22. Since by the end of the year, it's squaring Mercury again. Indeed, you'll recall that end of year 22, or rather going into the beginning of 23, what was happening was that Saturn continues to square, and then he had that problem where the documents were found in his garage, and all of a sudden the case against Trump became weaker, at least for a while, even though the circumstances were completely different. Nevertheless, that's Saturn to Mercury in a square, Mercury being documents, and then the square to the Sun going all the way up to March, because he has the Sun and Venus very late in Scorpio, so Saturn continues to square until right up till the first week of March. And then Saturn enters Pisces, so this is Saturn in Aquarius, as I say, in 2021 in the early part, and then makes its way right through the sign and enters Pisces. You might think that because Pisces trines Scorpio, that would provide relief. The problem is that before it can get to these Scorpio planets, in the early part of Pisces, you pretty much have to write the whole year off, because it enters Pisces there and then goes to 7 degrees in the summer and then stays in the early degrees until the end of the year. The whole time it's down here at the bottom of the chart, square the ascendant. This is quite challenging. The ascendant is a person's self-image, and it's, if not equivalent, very close to in value to the sun. Some people even say, some astrologers may say it's even more important than the sun, meaning if a transit is challenging the ascendant, all these factors can definitely play against you. Back here, when he was in Aquarius, it's a more pure connection to media, in that Aquarius is the third sign, which is the sign of media in this chart. But even here in Pisces, the theme has continued. It's continued to be a big problem. So square to the ascendant, and in this direction, square to Uranus as well, which Uranus is the co-ruler of media. Although, you see, Saturn all by itself is a media planet in this chart, because Saturn is in Gemini, which is the sign of media, was transiting through the house of media, but even when it leaves that house, it still continues to be a natal Saturn in Gemini circulating, and it's squaring Uranus, squaring the ascendant, which being Sagittarius is another media sign, so there is a definite media problem. So basically, there you have it, but then as you go into the spring of 24, pretty much around the spring, what happens is that Saturn will get beyond not only the ascendant degrees and Uranus, but also itself. So it squares itself in February, but then by the spring, it's beyond those degrees, and now instead it enters into a range where it starts to trine these planets. It'll trine Mars, and it'll get pretty close to a trine to Mercury, which happens in the summer of 24. Then it backtracks and returns to a station, 12 degrees, trining Mars. This is a much, much better situation, because now the Saturn aligns well with the Scorpio planets, and so my sense is what is going to happen here is this topic is going to lose its negative steam, so to speak, when we get into the spring of 24, either because hopefully, ideally, the best thing that could happen would be if suddenly, miraculously, the media began to focus, for whatever reason, on the wisdom of his age, because I honestly think that that is something Biden has been very unlucky with. It's very unfair to him. He is a tremendously effective president, and he doesn't get nearly enough credit for his wisdom, for his skill, for his abilities. He's done phenomenally well. So that would be ideal. But even if that doesn't happen, if perhaps at least the topic fades into the background enough to become less of a problem, which I think would be quite good enough, especially in light of the fact that in this region here, if we compare Biden to Trump, Trump's situation is in the red, in that, especially in here in the middle of the year, this is a Saturn station very close to a square to his sun and moon, and there are all kinds of other features in Trump's transits that put him in great peril then. So whatever the reason, who cares? It doesn't matter. Point being, This to me is lining up as a potential major shift that could really improve the situation as we go deeper and deeper into 2024, which is when it really counts, because that's when people are going to vote, that's when the election is decided, and if Biden is the candidate, then this would be a really, really welcome factor. I know there are rumors out there that maybe Biden might stop running and let Kamala run in his place. Fine, if that happens, that's a separate story. Then we wouldn't have to be talking about this. But assuming, as is now believed to be the case, that he will be the candidate for the Democrats, then the situation here, based on the transits, I think is much, much improved once we get into the spring of 2024 and we move toward the general election in November of 2024.